Hey everybody, and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Bell & Howell Auto 35 Solidus Reflex QL, also and more commonly known as the Canon EX EE. The EX EE and the Bell & Howell here they are the same camera. It's just that Bell & Howell had an agreement to bring Canons in under their badge, and so they did. But as you can see, the lens indicates that this is a Canon camera. When I saw this in a parts lot of cameras and intrigued, I didn't know that the Bell & Howell was the EX EE, which is a camera I've gotten periodic requests to do videos for. And but I saw the Canon lens and it looked fixed, and I thought, I'm really curious. So I bought the parts lot to get this camera and two others, and was just very happy when it turned out that all three of the ones I wanted worked. So anyway, the Canon EX EE is an SLR with a semi-swappable lens system. This whole lens doesn't come off, but the front part of it does. It has a center-weighted light meter. Now, what that means is that let's pretend that what you're looking at now is what you would be looking at through the viewfinder of your camera. What's inside this box, or more accurately, what's inside a central circle, is what would provide about 60% of the metering information. So if you have something very bright in the center, that's going to make the rest of your background very dark, which only provides 40% of the meter information. It also means that if you're taking a picture of a person and you put their face in the center, then their skin tone will be accurate relative to their surroundings in general, because the majority of the metering data will be coming off of that person's skin tone. This has shutter speeds of 1/8 of a second to 1/500th of a second, as well as bulb. So a very limited range of shutter speeds. It has a viewfinder magnification of 0.9x, meaning that what you're seeing in here is 90% of the size of what will appear on the film, and 92% frame coverage vertical by 94% horizontal. And what that means is that if what you are seeing right now is what's going to be on the film, then there would be cropping about like this on the sides and about like this on the top and bottom. So you'd lose about 4% each on the top and bottom and about 3% each on the sides. And that's fine. Seeing a little bit less than what's going to be on the film gives you a little bit of room to crop when you get into post or when you're making prints from your negatives. The focusing screen is a matte screen with a central prism circle. It's not a split ring prism. It's a group of smaller prisms used for focusing in the center of the matte screen. And then the flash sync on this camera is 1/60th of a second, indicated by the 60 being orange. And that means that 1/60th and anything slower can be used for flash. 1/125th, 2/50th, and 500th cannot. And in the second video, I'll explain why that is. Target market for the Canon EX EE was intermediate or beginner users. And basically, this is what we'd call a bridge camera today. It was designed to bridge the gap between point and shoots and SLRs to help people advance in their photography and, more importantly, for the company, their camera buying. And it was meant to help people get comfortable with the idea of swapping out lenses by allowing you to take off the front element and put in a different one to have a wider or more telephoto-y lens. We'll see how that works in the second video. I do have the 90 and the 125 on the way for this, but they haven't arrived yet, which is too bad because I really wanted to show you guys how crazy looking those lenses are. So basically, this is an advanced bridge type camera with some nifty features like the swappable lens elements, and the swappable lens elements affect how the ISO dial is set, and we'll see that in the second video. I'll show you how to do that when we talk about loading film and swapping out the lens elements. And there were four lenses for this camera: 35mm, 50, 90, and 125. The swappable front element groups helped to keep the overall cost of this camera low. It was an inexpensive camera, though it is very, very well built. And because it didn't have a full-on swappable lens system, it was an inexpensive system to move into for people who wanted to see if SLRs would work for them. These were produced in Japan by Canon from 1969 to I couldn't find the exact discontinuation date, but it was probably 1972, which is when the Auto EE went into production. So this was concurrent with the TL, the FTB, the F1, and possibly the FTQL and Pelix QL. You'll see the QL here. For a while, Canon had this really nifty system called the Quick Load system. Is that it? No, yeah, that's how it opens. And basically, this is the Quick Load system right here, where you don't have to actually put the film down, and I'll show you how that works in the second video. I think it's really neat, and it's too bad that Canon didn't keep using it for as long as they made cameras without motor winds. It was followed by the EX Auto, and then with the EX Auto, nothing else followed in the system afterwards because it's kind of a niche system, and as I understand it, it wasn't a high volume system, which is why it's taken me a very long time to get my hands on one of these to use. All right, let's go through the camera and take a look at all of the things on it. So we'll talk about what all of them are. Here's the top. We'll start as we do on technically the sides with the strap lugs, which is what you would connect your strap to. This is the this is the aperture control dial and on-off switch. In off, your light meter is off. In EE, which is, I think it stands for electronic eye or electronic exposure. One of those is Konica and one of those is Canon. If I'm wrong, someone's going to correct me in the comments. That's your automatic exposure mode right there, which means the camera will pick the best aperture based on your shutter speed. If you want to manually control the aperture, you do that here with your 1.8 through 16 dial. And 1.8 is the 50 millimeter lens's maximum aperture. All the rest are f3.5, which means if you have any of the other three lenses on the 1.8 there, actually means f3.5. That's kind of a weak point in the system, I won't lie. But then as you close this down, it stops down your aperture. When you take the picture, it stops down your aperture. So this is so that you can, if you want to use manual aperture control, you can. And as you'll notice, there are no clicks as I do this. And that's because this is a completely stepless aperture, meaning you can set it to any fraction of a shutter, of an aperture within the 1.8 or 3.5 to 16 range. Basically, when you're using manual shutter speed, aperture settings rather, you just need to adjust this until you have a correct meter reading, and who cares what the exact aperture is. That little line there is your index to indicate what mode you are set to, serial number. Cold shoe, you will not be using a flash in this cold shoe because there is no flash contact. Shutter speed dial with ISO selection dial right here. That little black line is the index, film plane indicator, film advance lever, shutter release, and frame count window with the frame index. On the side, we have the PC sync port right there, which is how you will use a flash if you so choose. On the front of the camera, we have the model number and the importer, in this case, because Bell & Howell didn't actually make it. We have the self-timer right here. It's just clockwork. As soon as you push the self-time button down, it starts counting down. One thing about the self-timer is the mirror doesn't flip up until the self-timer is done. So it's not like later cameras where the mirror flips up and waits for the self-timer to release. Then we have the lens base and focusing helical are built into the camera. On the camera's bottom, we have the battery chamber here, tripod bushing, country of origin, film rewind button. On the camera's back, we have the viewfinder, and I'm honestly not sure what design 237 means. I don't think this is on the Canon bodies. I think this is just on the Bell & Howells. If I'm wrong, someone will correct me in the comments. That could just be a Bell & Howell inventory code of some kind. Inside the camera, we have the film cassette chamber right here. Film guide rails. The outer guide rails keep the film from moving up and down, and the inner guide rails sandwich up against the film pressure plate to keep the film flat on plane. The shutter. 2 guide pins to help the film come off of the guide rails and get taken up by the film tension sprocket, which keeps the film from being pulled backwards by the memory built up into the film by being coiled in the cassette for months or years. This is the quick load film take-up spool, your film leader and indicator right here, quick load cover. Then we saw the film pressure plate over here, a little guide on how to use the quick load. That's a little metal sticker. That's not paper. That's meant to be there for a long time. That's nice. And then this little doodad right here is your cassette retention spring. So when this back closes, the cassette retention spring presses up against the film cassette to keep it properly aligned to help the film move through the camera smoothly. So some notes on the Canon EX EE. The focus distance scale right here between my fingers is built into the lens, and it only applies to the 50 millimeter. The 35 millimeter at least has focus scales built into it, and you know what, if I can figure out how to use them, I'll show you, but so far I haven't figured out how to interpret those very well. We'll see in the second video whether or not I explain those. With the 50 millimeter lens, because of the way that the ISO dial works, and we'll see that in the second video, the camera can use film speeds from 25 to 800 ISO. With the other three lenses, because of how this works, it cannot go faster than 500 ISO, which in practical terms is 400 ISO. So basically, if you're going to use one of these and you're going to use something other than the 50 millimeter lens, don't get a film faster than 400 ISO because you won't be able to meter properly with it. You could get close to metering and then figure out the actual settings from there, but this camera's in-body metering range is governed by the swappable lens system. So one thing about this is, as you turn the ISO dial, and you'll see this in the second video, you can turn it past 800 on the 1.8. Looks like it can go up to 1600. I have not been able to ascertain whether or not that means that you could actually get away with shooting 1600 ISO or not, but the manual at least says you can only go up to 800. In practical terms, if this can meter past 800, it's only got a 1/500th of a second shutter speed. Using 1600 or 3200 ISO film it's just going to be a mess. So it's not really worth doing. Also, the aperture has to be set, that is in manual mode, prior to the exposure. And once you press the shutter button, the aperture can't be changed. So let me show you what I mean by that. I'm going to set this to bulb, so I can hold the shutter open. And I set the aperture to, I don't know, looks like about f6.3. There we go. Oh, that is a filthy lens. Now, if I adjust the aperture in manual mode, nothing. I can't adjust it. It is fixed. So once the aperture stops down, it is there. In practical terms, you're not ever really going to need to adjust the aperture while the shutter is open. In the maybe 3 times in your life that it might occur to you to do that with this camera, you can't. Let's see just how filthy this lens is. It's so gross. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That's gonna take wonderfully sharp photos. Holy cow. Oh, look at all those, look at all the reflections inside of there. There is some dirt inside that lens. Some things not to do with your Canon EX EE: do not store the camera with the shutter ready to fire. So when you finish taking your photos for the day, depress your shutter. And the reason is because this is a mechanical camera. So your shutter is going to be clockwork. It uses springs, and when you arm the shutter to take a picture, the springs get pulled to be under tension, and if they stay like that, they can develop a memory, and that can affect the shutter timing or operation in general. So when you are finished for the day, it's a good idea to trip your shutter. It's cheaper to waste a single frame of film if you're still mid-roll than it is to have a camera serviced. Don't touch the shutter because that can brick your camera. Also, don't touch the front of the lens because your finger oils can etch the coatings. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car because heat can cause the oils in them to get thin and get to places, especially the aperture blades, that's an issue, where they shouldn't be and cause things not to work. Likewise, cold can cause your lubricating oils to get gummy and break down, and then they don't work either. Also, leaving your camera in your car is just a really good way to not come back to it. To come back and have a broken window and no camera. Do not store your gear in a plastic bag or box because fungus can and will grow on it, especially in the lens elements. You might have seen all those reflections a couple minutes ago. Some of that's fungus. I've already taken this lens apart and cleaned it too. I'm gonna have to, looks like I'm gonna actually have to take some of these elements out here and clean inside of them. Yeah, that's where the problem is. And that is fungus too. Anyway, you can get fungus by moisture getting into your camera, and fungus can etch the coatings and cause issues. And if fungus gets into your camera's leatherette, then you get to put a camera that smells like mildew up to your nose every time you use it. Also, don't let your camera get wet because it's not weather sealed, and water getting into it can cause parts in it to rust or corrode, which can ruin your camera very easily. Just remember, your camera is a precision piece of equipment. It should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So that is my first video on this, the Canon EX EE, also called the Bell & Howell Auto 35 Solidus Reflex QL. And if this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that I'm producing content which is helpful and useful for you. If you have questions, please leave them below. I'm pretty good about responding and checking comments every day or two. If you have suggestions or thoughts or things like that, please leave those in the comments as well. If I have the technical know-how and equipment to implement those, I'm more than happy to. If you'd like to subscribe to find out when I have more photography-related videos and technique and film and digital, whatever, that I release, which I try to do almost every week, please click on the subscribe button. One last thing, thank you everybody for watching, and I'll see you in video 2.